Deep beneath the shifting sands of the Middle East, under layers of forgotten empires, scorched earth, and the crushed bones of ancient kings, lies a history humanity is only just beginning to comprehend. We have been taught to read the Bible as a text of spiritual guidance, a moral compass offering peace, redemption, and the promise of eternal life. But when you strip away the theological interpretations, when you look past the allegories and the Sunday school sermons, a much darker, far more terrifying narrative begins to emerge. The scriptures are not just a record of faith, they are a chronicle of warfare, detailing a devastating arsenal of divine weaponry that defies the very laws of physics. These were not mere swords of iron or spears of bronze. They were instruments of unimaginable destruction, objects of such cataclysmic power that they leveled cities, parted oceans, manipulated the weather, and vaporized human flesh. For centuries, scholars dismissed these accounts as myth, as the exaggerated poetry of ancient scribes trying to make sense of a chaotic world. But modern archaeology, historical forensics, and advanced theoretical physics are beginning to paint a profoundly different picture. What if the miracles that terrified the ancient world were not magic at all? What if they were the result of highly advanced, perhaps otherworldly, technology, wielded by men who barely understood the forces they commanded? To understand the true nature of these biblical superweapons, we must journey back to the very dawn of human existence, to a time when humanity was first cast out into the unforgiving wilderness, barred forever from the paradise of Eden. The first weapon ever recorded in human history was not forged by the hands of men. According to the book of Genesis, after Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, God placed a terrifying sentinel at the eastern gate to ensure they could never return. It was guarded by cherubim and a flaming sword that flashed and turned in every direction, guarding the path to the tree of life. For millennia, artists have depicted this as a literal metal blade wrapped in fire, held by a winged angel. But the original Hebrew text suggests something far more mechanized, far more volatile. The phrase used for the flaming sword implies a continuous, self-sustaining rotation of consuming energy. It was a localized storm of fire, an omnidirectional barrier of intense heat and blinding light. Modern theorists looking at this ancient description have drawn chilling parallels to state-of-the-art plasma containment fields or advanced laser defense systems. Imagine the perspective of a primitive human, barely clothed in animal skins, witnessing a high-frequency, superheated plasma array localized at a specific geographic choke point. They would have no vocabulary for ionized gas or electromagnetic fields. They would only see a sword made of sunfire that moved with intelligent, lethal precision, turning upon itself in a mesmerizing, deadly dance. This was the first warning from the divine. The realm of the gods was fortified, and approaching it meant instant, incinerating death. This flaming anomaly remained at the edge of human memory. A burning trauma etched into our collective consciousness, reminding humanity that true power belonged to the heavens. But the heavens did not keep their weapons locked away forever. Divine power was placed directly into the hands of a mortal. It began as a simple shepherd's staff, a piece of dry wood carried by an exiled prince named Moses. Yet, when Moses returned to the court of Pharaoh to demand the release of the Israelite slaves, this ordinary piece of timber became the conduit for a weaponized manipulation of nature itself. The staff of Moses did not slice through armor. It shattered the ecological balance of an entire empire. When Aaron, Moses' brother, threw the staff to the floor of the royal court, it did not just symbolize a snake. The text says it became a serpent, consuming the illusory tricks of the Egyptian high priests. But the true horror of the staff was unleashed upon the Nile. By simply striking the water, the staff triggered a catastrophic biological chain reaction, turning the lifeblood of Egypt into a thick, putrid sludge of crimson. From there, the weapon seemed to unlock a sequence of targeted environmental strikes, manipulating weather patterns to summon devastating hail laced with fire, directing localized insect swarms with pinpoint military accuracy, and plunging a specific geographic region into an impenetrable, suffocating darkness that the Egyptians claimed they could physically feel. But the staff's most terrifying display of kinetic power occurred at the shores of the Red Sea. Cornered by the most advanced military force on Earth, Moses raised the staff, and the physical properties of millions of gallons of water were instantaneously altered. A massive wind tore the sea apart, creating two towering walls of liquid held in a state of suspended anti-gravity. For decades, scientists have tried to explain this away using the concept of wind set-down, a rare meteorological phenomenon where high-speed winds can temporarily push shallow water back. But the biblical account describes water standing as solid walls on both sides, an act of localized gravitational manipulation that allowed 2 million people to cross dry land. And when the staff was lowered, that localized field collapsed. The sea slammed shut with the kinetic force of a nuclear detonation, crushing the pharaoh's chariots, snapping bronze like twigs, and wiping an entire army from the face of the earth in a matter of seconds. The staff was a master key to the very source code of the planet, but it was only a prelude to the most lethal object ever constructed on Earth. Deep in the desolate, lightning-scarred peaks of Mount Sinai, Moses was given a set of blueprints. These were not mere suggestions for a religious artifact. They were highly specific, mechanically precise schematics for building a machine. The Ark of the Covenant is perhaps the most famous and most feared weapon in human history. Constructed of acacia wood and overlaid entirely with pure gold, both inside and out, the Ark measured 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. On its lid, the mercy seat, sat 2 solid gold cherubim, with their wings stretching toward each other. According to Scripture, the very presence of God dwelled in the space between those wings. But when viewed through the lens of modern electrical engineering, the Ark of the Covenant ceases to look like a magical box and begins to look terrifyingly like a massive electrical capacitor. Gold is one of the most effective electrical conductors on the planet, while dry acacia wood is an exceptional insulator. By layering 2 conductors separated by an insulator, the Israelites had unwittingly, or perhaps deliberately, constructed a device capable of accumulating and storing massive amounts of atmospheric electricity, especially in the dry, static-charged environment of the desert. The biblical text is littered with safety protocols regarding the Ark that read exactly like hazardous materials guidelines. It could only be approached by the high priest once a year. He had to wear specific garments interwoven with gold thread, complete with a grounded chain, and carry burning incense, potentially to create a protective cloud of smoke that altered the conductivity of the air. When the ark was transported, it had to be wrapped in specialized insulating skins and carried on long wooden poles. No one was allowed to touch it directly. The consequence for violating these protocols was not spiritual punishment. It was instantaneous, violent death. The most chilling example of this occurred when a man named Uzzah reached out to steady the ark as it wobbled on an ox cart. The moment his fingers brushed the gold surface, the text says the anger of the Lord burned against him, and he was struck dead on the spot. Forensic historians argue that Uzzah was not smitten by a lightning bolt from the clouds. He completed an electrical circuit, discharging tens of thousands of volts of stored static electricity directly through his heart, killing him before his body even hit the ground. But the ark was not just a passive hazard. It was an active weapon of mass destruction. When the Israelites marched into the Promised Land, they encountered the seemingly impenetrable fortress city of Jericho. The tactics used to conquer Jericho defy all conventional military logic. The Israelites did not build siege engines. They did not starve the city out. Instead, they weaponized the Ark of the Covenant in conjunction with another terrifyingly precise instrument of war, the trumpets of Jericho. For 6 days, the Israelite army marched silently around the city, carrying the ark, accompanied by 7 priests blowing ram's horn trumpets. On the 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times. And on the final blast of the trumpets, the entire army let out a massive synchronized shout. Instantly, the massive stone walls of Jericho did not just crumble. The archaeological record shows they exploded violently outward. Collapsing flat and allowing the invaders to charge straight in. For years, skeptics laughed at this story, but recent discoveries in the field of acoustic weaponry have silenced the laughter. Everything in the physical universe has a resonant frequency, the specific acoustic pitch at which an object naturally vibrates. If you can generate a sound wave that precisely matches the resonant frequency of a structure and amplify it, the structure will begin to violently shake itself apart from the inside out. This is the same scientific principle that allows a trained singer to shatter a crystal glass. The priests at Jericho, marching in a highly specific geometric pattern, blowing trumpets at a precise pitch, combined with the seismic marching of tens of thousands of soldiers and the sudden, explosive acoustic shockwave of their synchronized shout, may have triggered a catastrophic harmonic resonance within the stone walls. The ark, moving in the center of this formation, may have acted as a sonic amplifier or an electromagnetic trigger. The walls of Jericho were literally pulverized by weaponized sound. The devastation was absolute. As the Israelites settled their new land, the nature of divine weaponry shifted from complex, high-tech artifacts to brutal, visceral, biological anomalies. During the chaotic era of the Judges, the Philistines dominated the region with superior iron weapons and a massive, disciplined military. The Israelites were outmatched, disarmed, and terrified. But the divine response was not another ark. It was a single, genetically terrifying super soldier named Samson, possessing strength that defied all biomechanical logic. Samson was a one-man army capable of tearing apart a lion with his bare hands and shattering heavily armed Philistine battalions. His most horrific display of power occurred in the valley of Lehi. Ambushed by 1,000 Philistine soldiers, Samson found himself unarmed. In the dirt, he spotted the jawbone of a freshly dead donkey. What followed was a massacre so brutal, so hyper-violent, that it stained the history of the ancient Near East. Wielding nothing but a fragile piece of animal bone, Samson slaughtered 1,000 heavily armored warriors in close-quarters combat. From a physiological and physical standpoint, this is impossible. A piece of bone striking bronze helmets and iron armor would shatter after the first few blows. A human being, no matter how muscular, would suffer total muscular failure, extreme lactic acid buildup, and cardiovascular collapse long before killing 1,000 men in hand-to-hand combat. Yet the text describes the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him in power, suggesting a localized divine injection of kinetic energy and biological limit removal. Samson's muscles did not tear. The jawbone did not break. Every swing of that primitive weapon carried the force of a modern artillery shell, caving in skulls, shattering shields, and turning an army of elite killers into a mountain of mutilated corpses. The jawbone of the donkey became a symbol of raw, unsophisticated terror, a reminder that the divine could turn the garbage of the earth into an unstoppable force of annihilation. Yet, brute force was not the only way the divine tipped the scales of history. Sometimes, extreme precision was required. Decades after Samson, the Israelites found themselves in a tense standoff with the Philistines in the Valley of Elah. The Philistine champion, a terrifying giant named Goliath, stepped forward. Standing over 9 feet tall, clad in impenetrable bronze-scale armor, and wielding a spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam, Goliath was a walking tank. No sword could pierce him. No man could overpower him. He was the ultimate weapon of the ancient world. But he was defeated by a shepherd boy holding what most modern readers mistakenly view as a child's toy. David did not step onto the battlefield with magic. He stepped onto the battlefield with the ancient equivalent of a high-powered sniper rifle. The shepherd's sling was a deadly weapon used by light infantry across the ancient world, but in the hands of David, it became an instrument of divine ballistics. The physics of the encounter are staggering. David selected 5 smooth stones from a brook, specifically choosing aerodynamically perfect projectiles. When swung by an expert, a sling can accelerate a heavy stone to speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. As David sprinted towards the giant, he used the momentum of his own body to increase the centrifugal force of the sling. When he released the pouch, the stone exited with the kinetic energy of a .45 caliber handgun bullet. But it was the divine precision that made the weapon apocalyptic. Goliath's armor covered almost his entire body, leaving only a tiny sliver of flesh exposed on his forehead beneath his helmet. The stone crossed the distance of the battlefield in a fraction of a second, striking the giant exactly in that millimeter-wide weak point. The impact shattered Goliath's frontal lobe, driving the bone fragments deep into his brain and dropping the invincible giant instantly. The sling of David proved that divine warfare was not always about massive explosions or supernatural plagues. Sometimes it was about placing a single, hyper-accelerated projectile exactly where it needed to go to change the course of human history in an instant. Centuries passed, the ark was lost, the staff vanished, and the blood soaked into the soils of Israel dried and turned to dust. The empires of the ancient world rose and fell, eventually giving way to the iron-fisted rule of Rome. And it was under the shadow of the Roman Empire that the final, and arguably most mysterious, biblical weapon was forged. Not by a prophet, not by a divine blueprint, but by the cold, brutal pragmatism of a Roman executioner. On a dark Friday afternoon, outside the walls of Jerusalem, Jesus of Nazareth hung dying on a wooden cross. To ensure the condemned man was dead before the Sabbath, a Roman centurion named Longinus stepped forward. He did not use a divine relic. He used a standard Roman pilum, a heavy spear designed for piercing shields and flesh. He thrust the iron tip up into the side of Christ, piercing his pleural cavity and his heart. Blood and water flowed out, staining the iron. In that fraction of a second, an ordinary weapon of imperial execution was transformed into the spear of destiny, the Holy Lance. According to historical legend, the moment the blood of the Son of God touched the Roman steel, the spear was imbued with an incomprehensible, terrifying power. It was no longer just a weapon, it was a talisman of absolute victory. The legend whispered through the Dark Ages was chillingly simple. Whoever claimed the spear and understood its power held the destiny of the world in his hands for good or evil. But if the spear was ever lost, the possessor would suffer immediate and catastrophic defeat. This was not a weapon that summoned fire or parted seas. It was a weapon that manipulated the probability of global conquest. For 2,000 years, the most powerful and ruthless men in history hunted this piece of iron with an obsession that bordered on madness. It is said that Constantine the Great carried the spear of destiny at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, securing his absolute control over the Roman Empire and changing the course of Western civilization. Charlemagne, the father of Europe, allegedly possessed the spear and slept with it under his pillow. Remaining undefeated in 47 campaigns, the moment he accidentally dropped it from his horse, he died. The weapon passed through the hands of the Holy Roman Emperors, housed in a velvet-lined case in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna, radiating an aura of dark, seductive power. But the most terrifying chapter in the history of the Spear of Destiny occurred in the 20th century. In 1912, a young, destitute, and deeply disturbed artist named Adolf Hitler wandered into the Hofburg Museum and stood before the Holy Lance. He later wrote that the weapon seemed to hold a hidden meaning that evaded him, yet he felt as though he had known it in some previous century. He became obsessed with the occult power of the spear, believing it was the key to unlocking a mystical Aryan supremacy. When the Third Reich annexed Austria in 1938, one of Hitler's first direct orders was to seize the Spear of Destiny. The weapon that had pierced the side of Christ was transported to Nuremberg, the spiritual heart of the Nazi war machine, and placed in a specialized vault. Hitler believed that with the spear in his possession, the Thousand-Year Reich was invincible. For years, the Nazi war machine crushed Europe, seemingly unstoppable, driven by dark, occultic belief systems and the psychological anchor of this ancient, blood-stained relic. But the curse of the spear is absolute. On April 30th, 1945, at 2:10 in the afternoon, advancing American forces under the command of General George S. Patton breached the underground vault in Nuremberg and seized the Spear of Destiny. Less than 90 minutes later, 80 feet underground, in a concrete bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler put a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. The moment the spear changed hands, the empire collapsed. The weapon of salvation had become the ultimate instrument of doom. Where are these weapons now? That is the question that keeps historians awake at night and drives clandestine archaeological expeditions into the most dangerous regions of the earth. The flaming sword of Eden vanished with the garden, swallowed by the floodwaters of antiquity. The staff of Moses is rumored to be locked deep within the labyrinthine vaults of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. heavily guarded and hidden from public view. The jawbone and the sling are lost to the dust of the Levant, indistinguishable from the millions of other bones and stones buried in the desert. The trumpets of Jericho were likely melted down or destroyed by the Babylonians. The Spear of Destiny was returned to the Hofburg Museum, where it sits today behind bulletproof glass, though conspiracy theorists argue the true spear is hidden deep within the secret archives of the Vatican. While the one in Vienna is a clever decoy, and the Ark of the Covenant, the ultimate superweapon remains the greatest archaeological mystery of all time. Some say it was hidden by the prophet Jeremiah in a sealed cave on Mount Nebo before the destruction of Jerusalem. Others firmly believe it was smuggled down the Nile by the Knights Templar and now rests in a heavily guarded, heavily irradiated chapel in Aksum, Ethiopia, where monks who guard it allegedly die young of bizarre, radiation-like illnesses. We live in an age of nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, and hypersonic missiles. We believe we have mastered the art of destruction. But as we dig deeper into the sands of the Middle East, as our scientific understanding catches up to the ancient texts, a terrifying realization begins to dawn on us. The people of the ancient world were not making up fairy tales. They were trying, in their limited vocabulary, to describe encounters with forces so powerful, so volatile, and so utterly alien that it broke their minds. The Bible is not just a book of peace. It is a warning. It is a map. And somewhere out there, buried in the dark, the ancient weapons of the gods are waiting to be found again.